What's up, dude? How's it going?
It's going alright. I'm just taking a break from Fall Guys.
Okay, that's good. Do you play Fortnite often?
Yeah, I play Fortnite a lot. Mostly, though, I play with my friends.
Okay, good. Have y'all spent any money on this game?
Yeah, definitely.
Drew, be honest. Drew, be honest. How much money you spent?
I think like over $500, honestly.
The way we buy and purchase games have changed for decades now. Gone are the days where the majority of games in our catalog are bought from the traditional one-time purchase model, but instead we now have different ways we can enjoy our favorite titles. You can pay a monthly subscription to play a game, you can buy a game and then pay for DLC that might come out the next year, or you can install a game for free and have the developer bombard you with advertisements for cosmetics and battle passes. Along with the evolution of gaming technology changing the way games are made and distributed, so are the business models that companies use to maximize profit. The traditional method of purchasing games is called games as a product. This means that players would only have to worry about paying money upfront one time in order to gain access to all of the content the game has to offer. This was the most common way to sell video games before mainstream digital marketplaces existed, but over time this proved to be the most risky and costly for developers. Companies had to make sure the game was polished as hell before launch because once the game was out, there was typically no way for the developers to fix any bugs or provide content updates to players. What you paid for was what you got. At least that was the idea. Subscription-based models then started popping up more and more, with the first major game using this method being Meridian 59 all the way back in 1996, and then popularized with other MMORPGs like RuneScape, EverQuest 2, and World of Warcraft. This is where we start to see a shift in trend towards the games as a service model. What this means is that instead of there being a sole product that is being sold to the consumer for a one-time fee, players can access a game either for free or by paying for it, and then will consistently receive updates to the game in regards to fixing performance issues or providing content updates to keep players retained and draw in new players at the same time. Players could then gain access to this new content either for free with some restrictions, or with a monthly subscription, or just pay for the new DLC at a similar price for what the original game cost. This revenue model for video games became a more popular way to develop games because it did not require for companies and developers to release a completely polished product. They could release a playable but not perfect game for free or at a heavily discounted price, giving the ability for thousands of people to download the game with no cost to them except their time, and then use the player base as a form of quality control to finish updating the game and fix any bugs that might have been overlooked. When some people hear this idea, they automatically think that they are being used as a guinea pig, which in some sense they are correct. But even without video games, when are we not used as marketing guinea pigs by companies? And if I'm being used as a way to make the game better, then I personally don't have a problem with it. I think that's the sort of paradox about these free-to-play games. You can't really get mad at the game for being terrible if you got the game for free. You also know that given the popularity of the game, it will eventually be updated to fix any performance issues. But then the question becomes, how do free-to-play games make money? If they're free, how do we expect new content updates? The answer that game companies have come to is, well, instead of charging every player with one big purchase they have to make in order to play the game, how about we give it to them for free and have them make a bunch of little tiny purchases?
I'm a little guy. My hands are little, my feet are too small, my shoulders slope down. I'm a little guy.
Great. Okay, well, let's go.
Great.
I can't say that it's not working. I also can't say that me or any of my friends are not susceptible to the temptation of getting goofy skins that the others might not have. With the greater push towards microtransactions, we have also started to see greater pushback against them. If you watched my last video, you heard me talk about the Star Wars Battlefront 2 controversy surrounding the exploitative microtransactions that EA tried to impose on their player base. And in the process of trying to dig themselves out of that PR hole, they managed to set the record for the most downvoted comment in Reddit history. The way that microtransactions take place can also be different from game to game, but companies have more or less figured out what works and what doesn't. The most common way that players can spend a small amount of money on games is through some sort of battle pass progression system, or by purchasing loot boxes. Oftentimes, however, games will have a combination of both. For those that are unaware, loot boxes are literally as the name suggests. You get a loot box, and then inside will contain a random assortment of items that are usually cosmetic in nature. There's an element of RNG that goes with these loot boxes, and obviously the more rare an item is, then the less likely chance you will get that item. Some people argue that loot boxes are a form of gambling, and that it is exposing young gamers to the addiction that gambling can also create, since they have similar incentive structures. There are even countries that have banned the sale of loot boxes, as studies have come out linking the psychological effects between real-life gambling and purchasing loot boxes. Now on the other hand, the Battle Pass is basically a cosmetic progression system. For each level that you achieve in the Battle Pass, you will be given some sort of reward, like a new skin, or random shit like voice lines and banner frames. Maybe they'll even throw in a loot box that has an increased rarity chance, ooh. The marketing behind the Battle Pass is pretty interesting too, because they have a free version of the Battle Pass where even if you don't pay for it, you still go up the levels and will maybe give you a small thing every 5 levels, but then once you purchase the $10 pass, then you get access to every reward that would have been given to you. By using this method, companies are definitely capitalizing on players' FOMO, and in some ways it feels like the company is just dangling the carrot right in front of your eyes that you have to pay a small fee for. Also, the Battle Pass will usually change every couple of months, just enough time to play the game and complete the one they bought, and then the developers will release a new content update which will include new maps, game modes, characters, and you guessed it, a new Battle Pass. The games that have their business model geared towards players' microtransactions are typically referred to as freemium games. And some of the titles that helped drive this idea into the modern gaming industry are games from the MOBA genre, like League of Legends, Dota, and Heroes of the Storm. This has been more or less my relationship with games like this, more specifically with Apex Legends. When a new season for Apex comes out and I'm interested, then I will probably check it out on day 1 of the new season, most likely shell out the $10 to get the Battle Pass, and then when the season is over, I'm pretty much burned out from playing the game for a while. Maybe a couple months later, my itch for Apex will come back, and by that time, they will have already been through a completely different season. This has been pretty much how I've played Apex since launch. So if there's an example of keeping players retained for the long term, then call me a guinea pig. And I don't feel like I've been played at all, or that I'm a victim of exploitative marketing, because I always feel like I'm getting what I paid for, and I'm still choosing to spend the money. There's no incentive to spend this money other than to look cool, because at the end of the day, I can still play the game for free even with the content updates. But again, this isn't to say that this system can't be exploitative, as we learned from the EA example. Only that in my case, I don't feel like my money has been taken away from me unfairly. Since free-to-play games are more likely to attract a huge player base, one of the ways that these games have carved their spot in the gaming industry is by establishing a social strata surrounding the games. Take for instance the popularity of Fortnite. It seemed like almost instantly, Fortnite became one of the most popular games of all time, and the player base was and is still dominated by players that are 18 to 24 years old. They account for roughly 62% of the entire player base. Just for the fact that the game was free to play and had a colorful and unique art style was enough for players to become invested in the game. It's much easier to convince your friends to download a free game and shoot the shit than to ask them to pay $60 for a game like Destiny. Along with easier accessibility, games like Fortnite are able to then permeate through social media. To this day, Fortnite remains to be one of the top streamed games on Twitch and YouTube, along with content creators that might dedicate their whole career to playing the game. As free-to-play games becomes a much more popular way to play games and look for new titles, there is probably an entire community to immerse yourself into and enjoy the game with different people. Also, now that digital marketplaces are the predominant way players purchase games, free-to-play games are seen as a norm, and even have their own categories on marketplaces like Steam, the Microsoft Store, and the Epic Games Store. On top of that, we have things like the Xbox Game Pass, which gives us access to hundreds of popular titles for a monthly subscription fee, and honestly giving the illusion that the games we get through these are free. However, just because they aren't technically free doesn't mean that the Game Pass isn't a great deal. In my case, if I'm playing the amount of video games that I do, and am playing games off of Game Pass every day, then it most definitely is worth the $15 per month. Ultimately, the reason why I decided to make this video was because I was struck by how many freemium games are being released at this point, or games that are switching to the freemium model. Granted, I'm really only referring to the last 5 years, but that is when this trend really took off and dominated the gaming community. The point of all this is that it's important to understand how developers are making revenue off of these games. While it's great that you can support some of your favorite games with microtransactions and small purchases, as consumers, we still have to be wary about the different ways that companies can exploit us and use predatory marketing to entice players to make these purchases. As previously mentioned, some countries have banned the sale of loot boxes in all video games, and we should also understand that not every game's in-game currency is valued the same across the board. Some games might get you to pay more for the Battle Pass through their in-game currency than other games, and maybe the Battle Pass isn't as valuable and has way less rewards than other games. These are things to consider when engaging in these online interactions so that you could be on the lookout more often. Ask yourself, is this skin really worth the $25? Am I really going to play this game enough to warrant buying the Battle Pass? Is it worth investing not just my time, but my money into this game?